Guys, apparently I have an apology to make. Uh, I clickbaited yesterday on David Sanders on my live stream because he isn't coming. Well, I don't know where S. Wallman's sources came from, but I'm here to tell you that David Sanders is 100% coming to visit the Cornhuskers, and we are ecstatic about this group of visitors that we will be having this weekend. Along with David Sanders, of course, Isaiah Mosey and Michael Terry. Both will be visiting as well. There's a couple of other guys coming out as well, but those are the big names that have the most focus so far. So I'll get into each of those guys, right? Kind of where we stand with them, where other teams stand with them, and kind of what we expect coming out of this weekend and where Nebraska kind of is in the race with some of these guys. But first things first, if you like what we're doing here, please consider liking and subscribing, dropping your comments and let me know what you think. They really help me out. Every like, every view, every comment really helps me out with the algorithm, and I appreciate everybody's support and continuous support as we roll along here in the offseason and get towards the season. But let's go ahead and get into a little bit of recruiting news. You know, we have this little break in the dead period before we kind of get to another dead period. So Nebraska worked quick on trying to get some visitors out here for this weekend and week. And let's go ahead and line it up what we got. So first things first, I'll start with Isaiah Mosey. So Isaiah Mosey is visiting again this weekend after his dad was hired. We had mentioned that was potentially going to be the case because, you know, Isaiah Mosey, in talking to Oregon, you know, guys, and Wilson confirmed this yesterday and the same thing, they seem to be kind of lukewarm on Isaiah Mosey's commitment level with Oregon. So, you know, he has visited Nebraska, I believe, 8 times. So this will be another visit this weekend. And you have to think that Nebraska is probably in the driver's seat now with Jamar coming over. And now, of course, I talked about yesterday, Jamar, as Matt Rule said at Big Ten Media Days, is going to be working with the offensive specialist. So he's going to be working with these wide receivers and running backs. So directly able to be coached by his father, Jamar. That has to be a, you know, tantalizing option for him in terms of coming to Nebraska, committing to Nebraska. So I believe, you know, Nebraska is in a very, very, very good spot to land Isaiah Mosey. So not spending too much time on that. Let's go ahead and move to Michael Terry. So, you know, seemingly throughout this process, Nebraska seemed to be behind Texas and Oregon throughout. Texas was the leader for a little while, and it seemed like Oregon over the recent few months had taken the lead, right? He had visits in place to go to Texas and Oregon, but, you know, according to 24/7 Sports, Nebraska slid in and got him and his family to campus. So they were able to reach out, make contact, and get him and his family out to campus. You know, so Terry is right now, he's trying to kind of finalize these teams and get a feel for where he is in terms of fit, in terms of overall where these team want to utilize him and NIL. But I will say that they said that NIL is not a leading factor in his recruitment. He's seeking more clarity on the NIL and kind of what he's getting into with each school. But we've seen it throughout where Nebraska has a little bit of an advantage in terms of fit. But Texas, he's visited Texas once, I believe. So he will be visiting Texas Thursday. He has a comfortability, you know, with them. The NIL, of course, Texas is very, very good with their NIL. They have some of the best resources in the country, some of the most money in the country, if not the most, and also proximity to home. Michael Terry, of course, has said, you know, he wanted to stay in the state of Texas, but of course, Nebraska and Oregon snuck in and are giving him ideas elsewhere. And he seems to be, you know, very much in terms of where they stand with those schools. He seems to be ready to venture outside of the state of Texas if need be. Like I said, Oregon was seemingly the favorite and seemingly has been the favorite and is right now the favorite, I would still say. He's had 2 visits out there. He's visiting this Saturday to Oregon, and he was being recruited to them by Will Stein and the running back coach Rashad Samples. They are the leaders in his recruitment, and makes sense because they would like him to kind of be in the backfield, but want to rotate some packages for him through the slot as well, rotate him around a little bit of receiver. And then Nebraska. So he will be visiting Nebraska last, which is, you know, what is preferred. But he's visiting Tuesday and Wednesday. He's visited Nebraska once. And, you know, almost felt like I said, to the quiet nature of his recruiting, that Nebraska was kind of on the outside looking in. It just been really quiet on the front in regards to that. But Nebraska wants him to play a wide receiver. And it was, reported that Nebraska is very, very much in this race by Steve Wilfong today. And Michael's dad, stated that the staff had reached out Wednesday before his Texas visit, that he was going to be coming back to Nebraska. So good on the staff for getting in there and trying to get Michael Terry to campus one last time. I don't think Nebraska's in the lead. I still think Nebraska's playing catch up with Texas and Oregon. That doesn't mean that they can't convince him on his trip out here. Again, Nebraska has the opportunity to leave the most lasting impression. As of right now, in this setup, they seem to be his last visit. Michael, I don't believe, has set a commitment announcement date, but he does want to announce before this next season starts for him. So it'll be probably this summer if he can come to an agreement. So you have to think these are his last visits here. So that sets it up for Michael Terry as well. And now let's get into the big news of the weekend. David Sanders Jr. Okay, so David Sanders Jr., Nebraska, in my opinion, with David Sanders, out of these, out of Michael Terry and David Sanders, have the most likelihood of landing David Sanders. The finalists there we saw were Nebraska, Georgia, Tennessee, and Ohio State. Now, he knocked Clemson, his hometown team, out of the top 5. And, it seems like he's locked in on Nebraska and Tennessee right now, although Ohio State is still in contact with him. So I would not rule out Ohio State just because his last 2 visits are to Tennessee and to Nebraska. But I do think that bodes well for those 2 schools and where they stand with him. So, let's go ahead and break down, where he stands with these schools. So, the 3 others have been on his recruitment trail for years, a couple as long as 4 years. He visited Nebraska May 10th for the first time, the same weekend as Broderick Scholl. Broderick Scholl, of course, went over to Auburn. Nebraska offered him this spring. So I've talked about it before, but basically he had a relationship with Raiola, especially when they were both being recruited over at Georgia. They had established that relationship there. Once Raiola ended up coming over to Nebraska, then Nebraska got in on the mix on David Sanders. Raiola's been peer recruiting him this entire time, and he's doing that further. I'll pull it up in just a second of what Raiola has planned for David Sanders coming out. But it should be noted that Raiola wasn't there his first visit, but he will be there this time. And, Sanders has a relationship with not only Dylan, but with the family, with Donovan, who's going to be his position coach. So that's another thing to factor in, not only the relationship with Dylan, but that also means he has a relationship with who will potentially be his position coach. Okay. So a lot of relationships there. Nebraska has made up a lot of ground in a short amount of time, which means even though that Nebraska might be behind, maybe Tennessee right now, or it's a kind of a 50-50, you would have to think that with the amount of ground that they were able to make up in one visit, they should be able to also, kind of leave a lasting impression on him to get him to campus this time around. And like I said, Dylan Raiola is peer recruiting him left and right. I'll pull up a tweet in just a little bit from Dylan Raiola telling you what I'm talking about. Let's go over Tennessee real quick. So where he stands with Tennessee, he has visited Tennessee 4 times. And he talked about how he liked how they treated him like a priority. And he has a relationship already. He was friends with their 5-star George McIntyre and 4-star defensive lineman Ethan Utley. There were 2 friends of his before they committed to Tennessee. So there's a couple of, connections there in Tennessee as well. He mentioned the family environment and that he doesn't feel the pressure on him like he does from some of the other schools to commit to them. He says, they want him to make the decision organically, and that could very well be something where, that rules out. That also could be an approach that Nebraska's taken. Maybe that's one of the reasons that why Nebraska is where they are in the recruiting process of David Sanders. But he mentions family a lot too, which is another big thing that we hear recruits talk all the time about Nebraska. We heard yesterday at Big Ten Media Days from players, from Matt Rule, et cetera. It's all family, family, family. So David Sanders seems to be one of those guys who likes connections, who likes, the family atmosphere. He isn't one of those guys that I feel like is just lockstep for NIL. Otherwise, Ohio State, Clemson would have still been in there, and, he really would have leveraged Ohio State and all these schools for the NIL. It doesn't appear that he's doing that. It appears that he's just authentically wanting to build the relationships and goals where he feels the most comfortable. So, I like where we stand with David Sanders. I think, it's maybe a 60-40 right now with Tennessee in the lead, but we should have some more clarity, as we come out of this weekend. But again, just a huge visitor weekend. And I'm going to pull up the tweet here that I liked from Dylan Raiola showing his commitment to this peer recruiting and how heavily he's been recruiting David Sanders Jr. All right, here's Dylan Raiola's call to action. So just so everybody's aware, if you haven't seen it yet, Dylan Raiola tweeted a little while ago, Husker Nation, let's welcome David Sanders home to Lincoln. Meet us outside the new Tom Osborne complex at 5:15 p.m. tomorrow. Calling all Husker fans, go Big Red. I'll be picking them up at Omaha Epley at 1:30. Let's show him some love. So David Sanders, again, will have fans. Raiola's waiting to pick him up for the airport. I do feel like Nebraska has a great, great plan in place here to leave a lasting impression on David. And again, if he likes the family atmosphere and the family vibe, then I think he's going to have a great impression left on him by the amount of fans that are probably going to turn out tomorrow. The fan support has to go a long way with him, on top of just him feeling, welcome, feeling home, and feeling like this is a place he can grow and build with, not only Dylan, but maybe we see the likes of Michael Terry come in. Maybe we see the likes of Isaiah Mosley and these guys coming in around the same time. Maybe they can get in contact with each other. You never know how these things are going to work out. These guys are going to communicate and try to come up with some kind of plan. And here's another thing that is interesting. We saw Matt Rule. Now, this is just a theory. We saw Matt Rule mention yesterday the alternate uniforms, or the fact that he didn't get to answer questions on the alternate uniforms. I just think this would be a perfect scenario if David Sanders committed and he had some pictures with our new alternate uniforms on, whatever those may be. I know we saw the leaks of those other ones. Not sure if that's it. I'm not sure if those have been confirmed. I think people were just kind of speculating, but I think that would be pretty cool if we could land a guy like David Sanders and have him post the commitment in the new threads. That would be pretty sweet. So, like I said, just a theory. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I mean, you just have to be stoked and excited about one of the biggest, if not, this is probably the biggest recruiting weekend we've had and maybe ever. And depending on how it comes out of it, it really could confirm that this is the biggest recruiting weekend ever. Now, it's a big visitor list. We'll see what commitments come out of it. But even if, at the end of the day, even if Nebraska comes out of this with Isaiah Mosley, that this entire thing's a win. I've been saying it's a win from the start, and I think most people can echo this sentiment. But the fact that Nebraska is able to get these type of guys to campus when we haven't been able to before. Not only that, they are able to outlast some of these other big schools. Texas A&M was another school that was in on Michael Terry, and seemingly they seem to be out of the picture. So that's a Texas school with a lot of money right there that was in on them. So Nebraska's making a lot of movement, a lot of traction with these guys, and they're very much in the thick of these races. So I want to give another shout out to S. Wallman for telling me to stop clickbaiting on Sanders. He ate his words for lunch today. He didn't even make it through the full day with that before he started eating them. So leave a like for S. Wallman on the channel, please. All right. Well, if you want to keep up to date with all the latest and greatest in Husker recruiting news and notes and football season coming up, please subscribe, hit that bell notification to stay up to date with the latest breaking news. And I will see you on the next video. Peace.